For this project, we tested the sediment in the Minnesota River. We wanted to find the problem, what the sediment is affecting, and find ways to help the issue. These are the numbers we collected throughout the project. Sediment is a matter that settles to the bottom of a liquid. It comes in many forms and can originate from a variety of sources. Detrital sediment is produced by weathering and erosion of rocks. Chemical sediment forms when minerals crystallize and settle from water that contains dissolved particles. Biochemical sediment is caused as plants and animals die and their skeletons and shells are deposited on the ocean floor. Increased water temperature and reduced growth of vegetation decreases natural sunlight. This limits the production of algae and macrophytes. It also damages fish by irritating their gills and degrades fish habitats. When sedimentation is decreased, it causes degradation of an ecosystem by starving it of elements needed to sustain production. Erosion downstream increases the velocity. When the river is still behind a dam, the sediment it contains sinks to the bottom. Humans cause sediment pollution by deforestation, poor farming practices, and dumping of waste that is unregulated.
Why are some days like the levels are higher than the next day there's level?
I think that, well, I don't have a definite answer for you, but I think that part of what may be going on is that if you look at hydrologic graphs as well, the water will also have a peak flow that is very high and then the will become lower. And what seems to be going on there is the landscape has changed so much that water runs off very quickly after a heavy rainstorm, so without infiltrating into the soil. And because it's running off so quickly, it goes into the rivers almost immediately. You get really high peak flows, and when that's happening, this affects the sediment because the water's moving so quickly. I don't know if you've talked about hydrology in that way, but if you have the same volume of a stream but more water moving in it, the water has to move faster. The faster it moves, the more sediment it can carry, the larger the soil particles. So you have a heavy rainstorm, you don't have water soaking into the soil, instead it runs into the river, either over land or because of drainage. Then the river suddenly has a whole lot of water. All of that water still has to get downstream, moves very quick, and it carries a lot of sediment with it because it's moving fast and there's a lot of erosion. And then a few days later, that water has moved downstream, the river has returned to normal flow rates, the water's moving more slowly, and the sediment sort of filters out.
How does sediment affect the temperature of the water? And if sediment affects the temperature of the sediment, or like how the sediment is, the temperature outside?
So, first part of the question is how does temperature, or how does sediment affect temperature of the water?
Yeah.
So because the sediment gives something for the light to hit, the sunlight hits the sediment and it absorbs the energy from the sun, which increases the temperature of the water. But at the same time, I mean, sediment also acts as a shading factor, prevents sunlight from reaching deeper down. So the sunlight can't get to the base of the river, but my understanding is it does increase the temperature of the water because the sediment absorbs that energy of the sunlight and turns it into heat. And then what was the second half?
If the temperature outside affects how much sediment is in the water.
I don't see how that would affect sediment in the water.
Okay, and then just how could we help as like a community?
Yeah, that's sort of a hard question because the problem is really big. And our understanding at CURE is that it's really a matter of what's going on in the entire landscape.
Mm.
So as an individual, it can be very hard to sort of face that challenge. But I think that individuals who own land, whether it be a yard or something larger, do have the ability to control what is happening on that land. So you can make choices about how water is managed in your yard by putting in a rain garden, which helps slow the runoff of the water, which I talked about before. And you can also, if you're in a city, you can also work to, perhaps with the city on their stormwater control, to change how they allow water to flow off the city and whether it goes directly into the river or whether there are more rain gardens in public areas that will take water, stormwater from the streets and let it infiltrate into the soil rather than running directly into a storm drain. But I think we also need, across the board, a greater willingness to involve ourselves in the big picture, and that's what we try to do at CURE, is get involved at the state level to impact the policies that affect what happen on our landscape, whether that be the agricultural practices that allow so much water to run off the ground so quickly, whether that be the policy or the permitting practices that say what is and isn't allowed on our landscape. And I think that that's also a really big picture. So we have to work at the local level and take what we know based on what we see happening around our own homes, and convey that story to decision makers that work at state or even national levels.
Okay. That's it.
Right?